In Minnesota, ICE is abducting people off the street without warrants, without due process, without any respect for the Constitution, and frankly, without a shred of human decency. Will Stancil is a lawyer and political commentator who lives in Minneapolis and has been on the ground following and observing ICE tactics and recording their brutality. He joins the podcast to talk about how ICE is operating, what Minneapolis's community networks are doing to resist them, and why, despite the terror involved, he is hopeful. As always, thank you for listening. If you want to support the podcast, one way to do that is just by sharing it with your friends, your family, giving us a like, posting on social media. All of that is greatly appreciated. And if you really support the podcast, please become a member of the Center for New Liberalism. You can do that at cnliberalism.org/become a member. Get involved with a local chapter. Join our community Slack of organizers. Get some cool swag. And help support the podcast and the Center for New Liberalism's mission. One more time, thank you for listening, and enjoy the episode. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the New Liberal Podcast, part of the Center for New Liberalism. I'm your host, Jeremiah Johnson, and my guest today is Will Stancil. Will, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
So we're going to get into some potentially heavy stuff here in a minute, but I want to start out by saying that, you know, before a lot of things, you have been a prominent internet poster, a member of the discourse, you are involved in legal work, but you're a resident of Minnesota. You live there, you went to college there, this is your home, and you've been, you know, seeing stuff happen to your home that is very troubling.
Yes.
How are you doing? How are you holding up personally?
I've had better weeks. It wears on you, the stuff that they're doing to Minneapolis these days. And so I feel pretty tense. I'm having trouble sleeping a little bit. But I will say that and as I'm sure we'll discuss, the support of this community and the strength of this community is really sort of keeping me sane, and a lot of people sane, I think.
I mean, it's good to hear. I'm not, happy about the other stuff that you're having trouble sleeping. That I'm sure the shoulders have some tension in them that
I can
it's probably hard to get out. But I'm glad to hear that there are some bright spots. When it comes to people coming together.
Yeah, I mean, the way it feels here in Minneapolis, it feels like we're under siege, we're in a war, but it also feels like a war we're going to win.
So, as most of our listeners will know, Minnesota is, depending on what kind of language you want to use, the subject of a massive ICE operation, ICE and CBP with the Customs and Border Patrol and various DHS agencies. Some people have described it as the city being under siege. I'm kind of debating like how apocalyptic language do I want to use, but I'm not there. I'm watching it on social media. It's hard to, get a picture on social media. You can see lots of individual incidents, but from someone who's on the ground, how would you describe what's happening, with ICE in Minnesota? What are they doing? What are you seeing? And what have you been doing the last week or so?
So basically, we have had a very large number of very aggressive, highly militarized immigration officials. Border Patrol, ICE are the primary ones, but then other components of DHS, and they flooded our city. They outnumber. There's about 3,000 on the ground. So for comparison, all of the local police forces in the Twin Cities have about 3,000 people. These DHS officers are concentrated in Minneapolis, where the local police force numbers about 600, and so they outnumber the police 5-1.
And this is bigger, I think, just for context for the listeners. When Chicago kind of went through this months ago in 2025, I believe there were around 600.
That's right.
ICE officials who were in Chicago. So this is multiple times as big as anything we've seen before. And Minneapolis is a much smaller city.
That's right.
Than Chicago.
That's right. And so during the peak of this surge, it was impossible to go down a major street or even a side street, even a quiet residential neighborhood in Minneapolis for more than a few minutes without encountering an ICE car or even a convoy of several ICE or Border Patrol vehicles, often fully loaded with 4 or 8 masked federal thugs carrying assault rifles, lethal weapons, just rolling through your neighborhoods, which is in and of itself staggering. I mean, these are people you don't know, they're unaccountable. You don't barely know which agency they're for. Certainly, it's unclear why they're here. So in rolling around the neighborhood, essentially just menacing people. In the middle of all of that, they were also conducting. I would say they would say detentions. I would call them abductions of random people off the street, which I witnessed firsthand several times. Often, usually extremely violently, without any semblance of due process, or it's unclear how they could even possibly know the identities of the people they are abducting.
So when you say you've seen these in person, what are you doing that kind of puts you in proximity to this? Is it just going about your day, or have you been kind of part of the protests and the people tracking ICE activity?
So I've accidentally encountered a few ICE situations where they have essentially deployed into a major intersection and caused chaos. I don't think anyone's abducted in those. After that, I I've started taking part in these sort of neighborhood response networks. And so I've been, essentially attempting to tail ICE and federal vehicles around the city, not to obstruct with them in any way, because that's a crime and you will get arrested, but to observe and report back to the rapid response networks. Because of that, I have been, in several instances, essentially the first car on the scene as this was happening. I was directly behind the ICE car when men jumped out and grabbed somebody. And so I've seen it I've seen the process from the start to finish. And we're talking an abduction that I'm talking about here. It would last, the longest I saw was probably 2 minutes. The shortest was maybe 15, 30 seconds. They see someone, as far as best as I can tell, obviously I'm not privy to the conversations inside the cars, but the people they have taken have been pedestrians on the street, people walking on the street. They're not taking them from in a particular location. They're people that seem to be walking alone, people of color, always. And so one was a Black woman, one was a Latino man. They were walking alone. And then one was in an alley, one was on a major commercial intersection. And basically the cars screeched to a halt in one case, so they blocked me off because I knew I had been following them. The other one case, they ignored me. Guys hopped out of the car, ran to an alley, tackled the guy, dragged him into their van and squealed off. In the first one, they deployed probably 20 people to the street. They were tear gassing random bystanders who were shouting at them. They dragged off this woman, everyone's screaming, "What's your name?" And when they got her, no one has any idea who she is. No one could figure out who she was because she was just, walking down the street.
Well, so let me, there's a lot here. And this is, we've all seen videos on social media. People have been following this. It's stunning stuff, but how would you compare and contrast this, for instance, to like the normal procedure of like the police apprehending someone? Because you and I are both, I would like to think, relatively reasonable people. There's a role for police in society, and if
That's right.
Someone is a criminal, I hope they get apprehended by the police.
That's right.
But there is there's a normal way that police act. How would you compare and contrast that to what you're seeing with ICE agents?
One of the things that I think has been I would say, radicalizing a little bit in the sense of how I feel about ICE and these agencies is, not that I was a fan before, but is that comparing it to a traditional police agency. And I don't, I agree. I'm not an abolished police person. I think the Minneapolis police have had spotty track record over the years. Obviously, there's been some, in my opinion, substantial improvements in recent years. But at police arrest, they would find a specific person they either witness committing a crime. Generally, this is at least how you're supposed to do it, and usually how it happens, or someone they have a warrant for. They have a reason to suspect has committed a crime. They'll go to that person. Maybe there is, maybe they aggressively arrest them, push them against a wall, handcuff them, whatever, if they resist. I understand that this happens. Police can get overzealous with it. But certainly, an arrest is not necessarily a peaceful thing. However, after that, you take them to the car, you record their arrest. You maybe take statements from witnesses. And it's a slow process in a lot of ways. The police are there for 20, 30 minutes. If you're a witness on the scene, you can walk up and you can say, "Hey, officer, what's happening here?" Sometimes they'll talk to you about it. They'll explain. It is taking place in the view of the public, often, and there's not a sense that this is a secret process that you're not allowed to know about.
In a lot of cases, people would be surprised how bureaucratic police work is, right? Like,
That's right.
not every single time, but a lot of the time.
I've witnessed arrests in places that I frequent, and I've been curious what it was about, and I've gone online and I've looked it up, and I found their arrest record, and I found who it was and what they were arrested for, and you can figure out where they are. These ICE snatch and grabs, there's no record. There's no indication. Again, these are people walking down the street. They haven't committed a crime. These aren't people who are out there. They're not caught in the middle of a mugging or anything. They're pedestrians. A convoy, maybe of 4 trucks full of armed men, roll by. They say that one. They hop out. They grab the person. The person's screaming. The crowd is screaming. If you can't get their name, and we have failed, and in both cases I witnessed, we have failed to get the name. It's very difficult, obviously, to communicate with someone in this situation. And you have to have a lot of presence of mind to even think to ask for that. Shout for that, because it's not like you're having a conversation with the person. If you can't get their name, there's no way to figure out what happened to them. There's no record that of where they were picked up from. Very likely, if they're not a full citizen, they're going to end up out of the country within a day. We don't know where they are. We don't know if they're in Minneapolis. We don't know if they're somewhere else in the country. We don't know if they're outside the country. It's gotten so bad in here in Minneapolis that if we can't get the name, essentially a lot of the immigrant support networks, they were trying to get lawyers to sign these people. It's this sort of there's a triage situation where we say we can't really do anything about it. We don't know who they are. So I mean, the people eyewitness get taken. I hope they had family. I hope they had someone that they were able to communicate with. If they didn't, I mean, I might be the last person to see them in the United States. That's not a federal agent. And who knows? And so, and what I would say is that the word I would use there's a term I would use for the tactics they're using are secret police tactics. They can only conduct this in secret. Everything about what they're doing is secret. You're not allowed to know. And they're very resistant to you watching or observing them, which is why Minneapolis has become this cat and mouse game between people doing what I'm doing and what they're doing.
Well, let's talk about that for a second, because I've kind of been trying to follow this, and it's very difficult to follow from outside. And I've even thought about flying to Minneapolis, but I don't know that I personally would be helpful. But I want to know more. I want to understand more, and I think a lot of people have this feeling.
Yeah.
They want to understand more about specifically what you're doing and the network of people that you've joined with to try to do some level of monitoring of ICE, of public witnessing. And I think there's 2 reasons. There's obviously the train wreck reason of there's a train wreck, everybody wants to stop and look because it's naturally arresting. This is a dark, sick thing, but like you can't look away from it.
Of course.
There's also the knowledge that Minnesota might not be the last, it might be the first place that this happens. And I'm pretty sure that if they do this in other cities, we're going to need to learn lessons from what you're doing right now. So I guess, can you talk about kind of the network of activists that you're part of that are trying anything and everything they can to counter what these secret police tactics?
Yeah. And so first off, I would say that it started with activists, but I was not particularly active in these networks at all. Most of these people actually pretty much disliked me because of prior political stuff.
Wait, people on the internet have disliked you,
I know,
Will Stancil?
Who would have thought?
The first I've heard of it.
No, I mean, I was not well liked in these circles, but it is really kind of everybody in the neighborhood. And what it is, the basic structure of it is that there are channels, public channels, unvetted public channels, really, although it takes a little asking around to get the invite. In our case, it's Signal. Doesn't really matter what you use, but they use Signal. And each neighborhood has a rapid response network. And we're kind of nested. There's I think there's top level and then there's low, up down to the hyper local level. So I'm in the hyper local uptown rapid response network. When I started, there were a few hundred people in there. As of A few days ago, there's 1,500. So it's a very substantial portion of the neighborhood is in there at any given time. It includes people who are, you know, everything from just standing on street corners with whistles. Includes, I'm sure, the people in businesses. People are networked and people are in multiple networks and are just kind of, transmitting information back and forth between the hyper local networks. And then what my role has been primarily what we call them commuters. Well, I guess it's kind of a code word almost, but they're really mobile patrols. So I get behind the wheel of a car and I just drive around. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 hours a day. You just keep your eyes open for anything that looks like an ICE vehicle. It's not that hard to tell usually. There's certain cars they like, they have a look to them. ICE has a look to them. There's little things, which I'm not going to explain here because I don't want to change it. But there are lots of little things that are a giveaway that it might be an ICE car. You learn it pretty fast. You get a pretty good visual shorthand. Like that one's sketched, that one's fine.
I mean, honestly, much in the same way that, I hate to use the analogy, but much in the same way, police get a sixth sense that like something weird is going on here. I should go investigate. You get a sense, just the gestalt of, oh, that looks like something's going on this corner with this car.
Today, I'm driving along 36th Street here in Minneapolis. An SUV passes us. I glance at it for 1 second. It's a black GMC SUV. It's a state plate. It's kind of a weird state plate. I look up at the driver. He's a guy wearing sunglasses. I think it looks like there's someone in the passenger seat. I'm like, U-turn. That's ICE. I know. I'm sure. I bet like I'd stake my life on it that's ICE. And we call it, so we have networks. In part of these networks, we have dispatchers, and they have access to lists that activists and rapid response people have compiled around the country, including here in Minnesota, in various ways of vehicles that we are known to be ICE vehicles that have been cited on their properties or that we have seen, we've seen confirmed agents getting out of. And so you call them in, you say, plate check on LM277, 4 or whatever. In this case, I called it in today, that one, and it was correct. That was definitely ICE. And once you've confirmed it's ICE, or if it's a highly suspect, there's many cars that we very strongly suspect are ICE, you just follow. And you don't follow it in a way that is aggressive. You don't want to follow in a way that is, you're not trying to just get in their way. You certainly never get in front of them because that's obstruction, that's a crime. You don't follow in a way that is going to be menacing outside the fact that, they may not want to be watched. But you don't.
Yeah. Can I ask a question about that?
Yeah.
Because there's kind of two considerations here, I think. There's the level on which, like, you have to follow the law. You are allowed to exist in public spaces the same as anyone else. You're allowed to be on the road. You're allowed to film them. That's all legal. And so I guess number one is what are you trying to do to make sure you stay within the bounds of the law? But then there's also the reality that they don't always respect the law. They have been at many points, obviously violating the law, the Constitution, basic norms of civil decency. They escalate at any opportunity to escalate. They are very trigger happy. So what do you do in the more practical sense to make sure that, you don't end up pulled off the street and beaten up by essentially a bunch of masked thugs?
You just hope it doesn't happen. It's happened to some of us. There's an inherent risk in this, and the risk is that they will come to you, smash your windows in, drag you every car, pepper spray or tear gas into your vehicle, and then drag you off, and you'll be disappeared for 8 hours. In the past, generally when that's happened, they've just released us after 8 hours. Hasn't happened to me. It's happened to people I know. But it is ultimately that stuff tends to, there's some it backfires for them. If it's on video, we know if I'm following an ICE car and they slow down or stop, I tell whoever's riding with me, I always have a co-pilot, although it didn't always happen. I tell them, get your camera out. They might be about to get us. And so, today, there's also some other tactics they use. Today, I've heard this was happening. I was kind of actually amused it happened to me finally. Today, we were following an ICE car. Guy leads us to a sort of back street, gets out, your blood pressure spikes when that happens. But he just turns around, takes a picture with his phone. He's got a mask on, gets back in his car, and then he leads me back to my own house. He's run my plates. He's figured out And as he goes by my house, he leans out the window and he points at it. He points at the house and said, so he wants me to know, I guess, that that's where I live. And he knows that's where, of course, I knew what he was doing. The moment we're in the neighborhood, I'm like, oh my God, it's happening finally. I've heard they're doing this. He's taking me home. And so I shouted at him. I said, hey, man, you want to stop and get a beer? Tell me what you're up to over here, out here. But, he didn't take me up on it. But there's lots of tactics like this they're using.
It's such secret police tactics really. I mean, that's honestly the kind way to say it. I would have said Gestapo tactics, a little more emotional valence saying it that way. But yeah, it's like they want you to know that they know who you are, and they also want to make sure you don't know who any of them are. I'm reminded of what is the line about conservatism, that there are people who the law. Oh God, hold on. I'm going to look this up.
There's people who the law restrains but does not protect, and people who the law protects but does not restrain.
Yeah, that's the famous quote of, and it's probably a little too glib, but like circumstances like this, I feel like really make that quote like sit in my heart a little bit. I don't know.
What is funny about it? I mean, it's like it's interesting because when they know who we are, and I've made no attempt to figure out who they are. I don't care what their names are. I'm not trying to dox them. Not that, and I think we probably have a right to know who they are, but doesn't really help me to know. What we're doing, what's so interesting about this is that what we're doing, even though it can be aggressive, the following can be aggressive. They try and run red lights and stuff to lose you. There's lots of kind of car maneuver stuff that is pretty reckless driving that they'll do to try and lose you, go down wrong way down one way streets, or stop short so you outrun by them or whatever. But outside of that, no one's doing anything illegal. You're following them. You're honking your horn occasionally to attract attention if they're in an area where you think that might be helpful to get more eyes on them, or sometimes it's just there's lots of observers around in a major commercial neighborhood, and you want everyone to know those are ICE cars, and so you just boop, 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 over and over and over. I just posted a video of that, or you just you film them, but they can't deal with it. Because their tactics are these secret police tactics. They are unable to operate with in that environment, even though we're not doing anything illegal to obstruct them, or obstructing them physically in any way whatsoever. Or stalking them at home or looking them up. But that's what they're doing to us. That's what they feel like they have to do to us. One of the things that actually reason I'm on this podcast, I've talked about this a lot online. I'm not trying to put myself forward as the guy who's doing this. I want to be clear. There's thousands of people doing this. Today, when I was out driving around, there were 30 people in my neighborhood. There's 50 in the next neighborhood driving, hundreds more on the ground. This only works as a neighborhood effort. But part of why I wanted to be public about this is that I think that so much of their intimidation relies on the idea that we ought to be ashamed or scared for doing what we're doing. And I'm trying to say, no, we don't have to be ashamed. We're not doing anything wrong here. We should be proud to stand up for our community. Not that everyone should go out there and put their name on it if they're not comfortable, but they should, but that is their main restraint on us, is making us scared that somehow we will be punished by them for having to participate in this. But the reality is that there's just too many of us, and there's too few of them. Yes, there's 3,000 of them here. That's a lot compared to our police force. It's a lot on the ground when you see guys with guns running around. But compared to the population of my neighborhood, much less my city, much less my region, it's a tiny, tiny drop. And we outnumber them 100 to 1 on the ground every single time they pop their heads up. And it's just suffocating.
Well, and I'm reminded of the quote about fascism that, most power that is ceded to authoritarians is ceded willingly and quietly. It's not explicit. It's the lack of resistance. It's when they do something and you don't bother to step up and say something about it.
That's right.
When you accede to it, and they're kind of relying on that power that, well, we've intimidated you and nobody's going to do anything about this. And, if they're forced to confront people every time they do something, if it's forced to be in the media, the public will have its say. It's very hard for that not to be the case. And look, if they were hanging out at the courthouse and just, looking at people who get arrested for violent crimes and who has an immigration case and deporting all the potentially criminal immigrants, there would be no outcry. If it was a bunch of bureaucratic paperwork happening, this is essentially what Obama did. Obama deported a lot of people, and it was never an issue for him on either side of the aisle. But they're very clearly not trying to maximize for that. They're trying to maximize for some sort of intimidation factor.
I said this a few times on different interviews and podcasts and stuff, but ICE at this point, I get pretty frustrated, honestly, with some of the discourse around ICE and DC and, do we fund it and put body cameras, all that. And I think that the key fact that's missing right now from the discourse is that Democrats and people are saying that are making a category error. You can believe whatever you want about immigration enforcement. I'm a liberal, so I'm an open borders guy. I actually don't want much of immigration enforcement. I love immigration. I love immigrants. But look, I understand. A lot of people, there's probably a middle ground there. A lot of people, it's not terribly popular to say that, a lot of people want some immigration enforcement. Fine, whatever, we can debate it. But what they're doing is not immigration enforcement. In fact, if you wanted to do immigration enforcement, this is the least efficient way you can do it. Every time I see a large number of these guys at once, they're not even taking anyone. They are tear gassing the neighborhood. My favorite restaurant in the neighborhood got tear gas for no particular reason. They blew up the intersection. I was driving along. They tear gassed another big intersection. I actually got tear gassed twice in 2 days. They didn't take anyone in either of those instances. They were just causing chaos. It took 20 guys, probably $500,000 of equipment, a convoy of 5 heavily, armored SUVs to do that. And he didn't even make a single arrest. So it's a huge waste of resources. What ICE is right now, it's not an immigration enforcement agency. DHS isn't acting as an immigration enforcement agency. It's an internal, secret police service trying to instill terror in a population that they think, they would politically benefit from terrifying, that is using immigration as a pretext to do that. And they are, in particular, they can do that because so much of the terror that they are trying to instill for vile reasons that I think relate to Stephen Miller's twisted youth is directed at people of color. I mean, it is really hard not to notice when you're here on the ground in Minnesota, the way that they are essentially just treating anyone who's not white as someone who is a viable target to be snatched and grabbed and disappeared. One thing that's interesting about Minnesota, and not a lot of people realize this, they've talked so much about Somalis. We also have a large Hmong population, refugees after Vietnam War. These two very large populations of immigrants here in Minnesota are almost entirely made up of U.S. citizens. Somalis, it's like 85 to 90%. Hmong is even higher. There's barely any Hmong in the country or in the state that are not U.S. citizens.
Well, and because the big Hmong population wave came in the 60s and 70s.
It's 50 years ago.
As a result of the Vietnam War and the aftermath of that, right?
Yeah, it's 2 or 3 generations in now. This is a population that is, is noticeable, and culturally it's very impactful and important here in Minnesota, and it's great. But is a population. It's not a population of recent arrivals. It is a population that has been here for a long time and is well integrated into the city. And frankly, I know for a lot of the country, the idea of having a large number of East African immigrants and Somali immigrants is strange, but that population has been here a long time too, at this point, decades. And most of the people in it have either been here long enough to be naturalized or first generation.
So one of the questions that I think people are going to be interested in and could potentially be useful to people is, if, say, this starts happening in another city, I'll just throw out a random city, it starts happening in what's a blue? It's happening in Chicago now, or they start doing stuff in Los Angeles or Denver.
Yeah,
and activists there, people on the ground, both activists and regular people, want to know how can we effectively resist this? What can we affect? We're not going to be able to stop it entirely, but what can we do to make sure that people are protected, to make sure that they're not able to snatch people with impunity, or at least not as much as they would be able to? What are the lessons you've learned? Because I would imagine over the past week or two that you and people like you have kind of been refining, okay, this is a thing that works. This is a thing that doesn't work. This is something we should all know how to do. This is something that we should make sure not to do. What are the lessons that people are teaching each other in kind of these back channels?
Okay, so a few things. The first is all depends on having the neighborhood networks in place. If you want to do something right now to get your city ready, go help talk to your neighbors, get a rapid response channel, signal channel going. Do it now. It doesn't have to be huge. It doesn't matter. You have 50 people in there for your neighborhood. That's fine. You'll be able to find that many. That way, if anything happens, you have something you can add people to that's ready to go. Nothing I'm doing or anyone else is doing would be possible without these neighborhood networks. They have to be built. And if you can do that without anything being here, so build them now. Other things you can do, I think it's important. I first few days I did this, I was untrained. I just literally joined the rapid response networks, just following ICE around. I could follow them okay. I didn't really know what the order, of priorities was if I saw something. So, like for instance, the first convoy that I saw abduct someone, I've told the story a few times now. I handled them. I mean, I followed them quite nicely, and in fact, I managed to intercept them a few times because your neighborhood knowledge is so much greater than theirs. You know where they're going, and you can just it's kind of funny. They get so lost, and you just wait and lurk for them and jump out on them. But the once they pulled over, I didn't know what to do. I mean, I was sort of like I so I was going to film it, but I couldn't get my camera ready, and I hadn't really thought it through. So I went out there, and then just rage takes over because you're watching them brutalize your neighbors, and you just start screaming at them, which was very satisfying. But there were lots of people screaming at them, and I can't say I contributed a lot at that point. Take a training that tells you that. I mean, you need to basically what you should be trying to do is a handful of things: alert people, record as much as you possibly can, and if you're taking anyone, get the basic information so that person can be identified later. That's your objective. And also, certain things. I mean, this wasn't an issue for me at that point, but there are certain things you don't want to do, which is say anything menacing or threatening or violent. Don't do anything to get perceived as a violent act because they are looking for an excuse to start shooting. And generally, don't get in front of the cars, for instance, because that's obstructing them. So take those trainings are very helpful. Also, it's just there's lots of little things you wouldn't necessarily know. Like for instance, like how to distinguish between the different federal agencies that are going to be involved. I mean, there's ICE, and they're just like sloppy fat guys wearing baseball caps, and then there's Border Patrol, and they're kind of scary. I mean, they're geared up. They're here for a war. And so being able to distinguish and identify those is important, and that sort of stuff is stuff you can train up to do now. I guess the other thing I would say also, if you're thinking about this, is that, again, what I had sort of said before, recognize that your neighborhood, if you live in a city, your immediate community probably contains more people who would resist this than ICE's entire invasion force could contain. And so, don't despair. Saw a lot of people saying early on, how can we, it's an occupation, especially people who weren't here, who weren't seeing how the community was reacting. It's an occupation. How could we possibly fight this? It's fascism. But on the ground, the idea, it's miserable, and they're really hurting my community, and they're going to hurt the businesses, and they're going to hurt the economic vitality, and they're going to destroy a lot of families, and they're going to get some people. You can't stop them from getting everybody. But the idea that they could win is laughable when you see the degree to which they have united the city against it. I mean, you go anywhere, you go to a bus stop. I was staying at a bus stop last night. There's kind of a random guy, might be homeless. He's talking about ICE. I go to a restaurant. There's 5 tables. I pass all of them. Every single one of them is talking about ICE. You go sit down at the bar. The bartender is talking about ICE. You go out to the grocery store. The grocery store clerk wants to ask you about ICE. It's the only thing anyone wants to talk about. And so it's the city is 100% completely uniformly united against them. And in that situation, I mean, someone said to me yesterday, you can't police a population without the consent of the people being policed. They don't have enough guns to truly occupy us. It is essentially an aggressive secret police action. They don't have our consent. And now you see how poorly that goes. I mean, they can't even come into my neighborhood anymore without getting trailed instantly from the moment their wheels hit the pavement. And it's unviable for them.
I certainly hope so, man. And it's, so much of what you're saying is so grim that, the idea that if you don't remember, you or one person like you, if one or two people witnessing this don't remember to shout, "What's your name?" If you don't hear someone's name, there might be no record of what happens to them.
I have a lot of guilt because one of the people I saw get taken, I was too focused on calling it out to the rapid response. I did shout, "What's your name?" But it was after he was already in the van. And there was no way he'd hear me or I could hear him if he responded.
Yeah.
And if I'd gotten it out sooner, maybe I would have known. And because I didn't get it, like, it's kind of on me. We don't know who it is.
Well, I mean, I, it's insane, though, is what I'm saying, that it has to be on you. Like, that's not,
Oh yeah, I guess.
that situation is not of your making. And, it's just crazy that that is the last line of defense. And this guy maybe he'll get deported. Maybe he's in Louisiana. Maybe he's in El Salvador. Like, we don't know. And that's it. It's not how anything should work. It's not how criminal justice should work. It's not how any kind of law enforcement should work. But it is, I think, also important that you note, like you said, that the future doesn't have to be like this, that we can resist. And there are ways, that the community can make sure that people are safe, and that, like, I don't know, I've been very heartened by the reaction from people who I would not normally consider my political allies, looking at this and saying, like, this is insane. Like, what's happening to our country?
It's funny because you see people, I know I've run for office. I know a lot of people in my neighborhood very well. And there's people who've come to me who are not radicals, who are, homeowners and middle class. And they're essentially like, can I get into the rapid response networks? And I'm like, yeah, here's how you do it. And they're like, and they're like, I'll go to jail for this. They're like, I don't care. It's like they're like fully, completely against it, because I was here in 2020. And in 2020, obviously there's kind of a breakdown in civil order. The police, in my opinion, were significantly responsible for that. But once it happened, it was kind of chaos, and it wasn't even clear who to blame for the rioting and the disorder. This time it's different because someone is doing it to us, and everyone knows who it is. And so it has galvanized the entire city and the entire community in a way that I have never experienced before. And it just goes. And I think that Stephen Miller and Trump, I think, in their head, they're assuming that people would react the way they have reacted, because they're bullies. And so they just always, suck up to the stronger person in the room. And they think, well, we'll come in with guns and we'll break them. And then, they will all be, cowed and hiding and behind their blinds and run away when you show up in public. And they weren't expecting a situation where they kill someone. And then after they kill someone, they increase the deployment and they start tear gassing schools, and they started, breaking skulls in the street. And instead of running away, people started running towards them, like, more and more and harder and harder. And it's like, they don't know what to do, because I was the only tool in their toolbox.
It seems like the role that you play, and I'm just an outside observer. I could have this totally wrong, but it seems to me like the role that you're playing is that you are forcing the public to take a side. This is not something that's going to happen silently. It's not going to happen, out away from the public's eyes. That you are going to be there. You're going to record it. You're going to document everything that happens, and the public will have to choose a side. And given the way that they're behaving, given the way that they're just brutalizing people, I feel pretty optimistic the public is going to take our side in this. Like I said, even people, it's the most cliche thing in the world to, like, cite Joe Rogan, but Joe Rogan is on his podcast talking about how this is insane, and, like, why do we have masked thugs going around, and, like, that really heartens me. I don't know, man.
I took a friend on a sort of a ride along, and we came upon a scene of where ICE had deployed into the middle of an intersection, and they were spraying pepper balls at the crowd. They were all Border Patrol, so they were, like, really geared up.
Was this one of the instances where you got gassed?
Yeah, and so I filmed all this.
And just people are listening to this. People are not going to see the visuals, but, like, I'm watching Will's face, and he's blinking a lot. I can tell that he's been tear gassed at some point in the last couple of days, because his eyes are, like, blinking all the time.
Yeah. So we pepper balled, the entire. They're just spraying on the crowd, and then they launched tear gas, in which I just got a really nice, full blast of. Which turns out to be really unpleasant, by the way. I don't recommend it. I actually went and bought a gas mask afterwards, because I was like, that's not happening again if I can help it. And my friend, it was like, this guy, he was riding along with me. He's not a friend of ICE's, and we get home, and he is just, like, mad in a way I've never seen him before. Worked up, like, ready to fight. And I just don't think, I just don't think that people really recognize how much like attacking a community is you know will energize that a community, and that's what's happening here in Minneapolis.
All right. Well, I want to let you go because I know you've had a long day and you're probably going to have long days in the future.
Yeah, I need a beer. Well, I will say one note. Well, also one happy note. It does seem like here in South Minneapolis, which is sort of my local area, they have pulled out to a significant extent. The last 2 days have been very quiet. I've followed a few ICE cars, but you haven't seen anyone bust out into the street with a major deployment. And I think that the community watch has just been suffocating for them. So I want to knock on wood because I don't want to jinx it. And they may come back. They do. They tend to do, come in force and leave in force and come back. But I think there's signs for optimism here, at least in my part of Minneapolis. So
I've seen so much stuff that like I saw something yesterday that really made me tear up. It was these like very stereotypical, like they even had the freaking accent, God bless them, some Minnesota moms, like this stereotype of Minnesota nice moms, like with the actual accent, the oh hun kind of thing.
yeah.
And they were going around buying like, like this one lady bought like $1,000 worth of groceries to like distribute to like different families that she knew so that they wouldn't have to leave the house because they were not white and she was. And she was like, until this is over, I don't want them leaving the house. So like we're going and we're buying your groceries for, like, I got choked up at that. And
That's
yeah.
it's you see so much. So I've been on the sort of the ice hunt side of things.
You've been on the thrill junkie side of it.
Yeah, the driving too fast in snow side of things. But the other side of this is the community support. It is incredibly massive. I know so many people. They're delivering groceries. The schools, I know it's a nightmare in the schools. It's like COVID, where like 2/3 of the population in these schools aren't showing up, and they're having to do remote teaching because of it. And so the school networks are supporting families. Many of the businesses are providing free food. Many of the businesses have like canceled their food menus because their kitchen staff are immigrants and they don't want them to have to come to work. Even things like on Lake Street, Minneapolis, which is sort of an immigrant hub. On every corner there's a watcher. There's someone watching, usually like an old white guy with a beard. Very Minneapolis, old hippie, with a whistle and a vest. And then today we're sitting out there. I'm just parked waiting for ICE to go by because that's what we do. We lurk. And there's this guy watching in the corner, and then this young Somali woman comes down and is like giving him coffee and food, and they're all so everyone's supporting each other in that way. And it is I cried a little bit when I saw that because it's just like the immigrants are supporting the community defense, and the community defense is supporting the immigrants. We're all no doubt that we're all in it together.
So as a last question before we get you out of here, and this is kind of the traditional last question I always like to ask people. What should they do if they want to learn more? If my listeners want to know how to keep abreast of the situation, what news sources they should follow, and this could be accounts to follow on social media, this could be papers or blogs that are covering it particularly well. If people want to stay abreast of this situation and they really care about this, what should they do? What would you recommend?
There's two things I'm going to say. First, find people in Minneapolis. I think that the Renee Good shooting, terrible as it was, absolutely awful, has overwhelmed a lot of the news about the day-to-day here. People have not realized for a long time how much it had devolved into a war zone because so much of the focus is on the Renee Good shooting and her injuries and whether or not she tried to run Jonathan Ross over with her car or whatever. That was an inevitable outcome in some ways of what's happening all the time, many, many, many times a day here in Minneapolis. So follow people in Minneapolis. There's thousands of videos out there probably at this point of stuff. They are not cherry picked. This is representative. That is what's happening all the time here. The other thing I'd say is to the extent you communicate with people in the rest of the country that are, news or whatever, make it clear this is a priority. It's been very frustrating to us in some points to see that, I'm seeing things every day that are unbelievable that I never thought I'd see in America. Abductions and, street shootouts with police. Not less, non-lethal shootouts, but with like tear gas and riot canisters and stuff like that. And it's like not being covered. It's not being talked about. There's a sense of, ICE is surging in Minneapolis, but there's no sense of what that actually means. And so I think that recognizing that what's happening here in a lot of ways captures what Trump wants to do everywhere and covering it as if it's an important thing rather than some strange Minnesota sideshow is very important.
Well, look, stay strong, Will. I hope you guys. I think what you're doing is a good thing, and I hope that you and all the people in your network stay strong. I want to say thank you one more time to my guest today, Will Stancil.
Thank you.